On July 29, 1883, in Dovia di Predappio, Italy, Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini was born. His father, Alessandro, a blacksmith and fervent socialist, instilled in him a fiery temperament. His mother, Rosa, a devout Catholic schoolteacher, tried to instill discipline and piety. Benito often clashed with his mother's traditional views. Despite academic struggles, he possessed natural charisma and a gift for oratory. The seeds of his ambition and thirst for power were sown in these early years. Italy at the turn of the 20th century was grappling with newfound unity, poverty, and social unrest. Mussolini absorbed these societal tensions, witnessing the plight of the working class and peasants. His father's socialist ideals and his own experiences with poverty inflamed his sense of injustice. He found solace in socialist newspapers and discussions in cafes. Mussolini's brand of socialism was revolutionary, disdainful of democracy and compromise. These authoritarian tendencies would lead him down a path of nationalism and dictatorship. In the early 1900s, Mussolini transformed into a fervent political activist. He contributed fiery articles to socialist newspapers, rallying against capitalism and parliamentary democracy. His journalistic endeavors propelled his political career, captivating audiences with electrifying speeches. Mussolini's temperament often put him at odds with socialist comrades. He believed in the necessity of violence for revolutionary change. World War I intensified his nationalism, setting him on a path toward a radical ideology. World War I was pivotal in Mussolini's ideological evolution. He broke with the socialists, urging Italy to join the war. His calls for war resonated with many Italians, catapulting him to national prominence. Mussolini's wartime experience intensified his belief in courage, discipline, and self-sacrifice. The war deepened his disdain for democracy, confirming his belief in strong leadership. His authoritarian worldview, nourished by war, took root. Post-World War I, Italy faced social, economic, and political turmoil. Mussolini's fascism took root, promising order and strength. Fascism exalted the nation-state above all else, suppressing individual rights and dissent. Mussolini's rhetoric resonated with those disillusioned by the Treaty of Versailles. Fascism offered a seductive alternative to liberal democracy, promising national pride and glory. Mussolini's message found fertile ground, setting the stage for his rise to power. Mussolini realized the need for a paramilitary force, leading to the formation of the Black Shirts. The Black Shirts, recruited from disillusioned war veterans and unemployed youths, became enforcers of fascist ideology. Mussolini exploited their frustrations, directing their aggression towards political opponents. The Black Shirts' violence created an atmosphere of fear and impunity. Their actions paved the way for Mussolini's seizure of power. The Black Shirts' brutality silenced opposition, enabling Mussolini's dictatorship. By 1922, Italy was on the brink of collapse. Mussolini orchestrated the March on Rome, mobilizing tens of thousands of Black Shirts. The government, paralyzed by indecision, crumbled in the face of this display of force. Prime Minister Factor pleaded with King Victor Emmanuel III to declare a state of emergency. The king, fearing civil war, refused to act. Mussolini was invited to form a new government, marking the beginning of his reign as Il Duce. Mussolini's appointment as prime minister masked a sinister reality. He moved swiftly to consolidate power, dismantling Italy's democracy. Mussolini pressured parliament into granting him dictatorial powers. He silenced dissent, muzzled opposition newspapers, and outlawed other political parties. The Black Shirts intensified their campaign of terror, targeting political opponents. Mussolini transformed Italy into a totalitarian state, with all aspects of life under fascist control. Mussolini reshaped Italian society in the image of fascist ideology. He sought to create a totalitarian state, subordinating all aspects of life to the state. Trade unions were abolished and workers' rights suppressed. Education became a tool of indoctrination, glorifying fascism and instilling obedience. Mussolini used propaganda to shape public opinion and create a cult of personality. Beneath the veneer of stability, Mussolini's totalitarian state tightened its grip on Italian life. Cult of personality, the making of a modern dictator. Central to Mussolini's grip on power was the cultivation of a carefully crafted cult of personality. He presented himself as Il Duce, the supreme leader, the embodiment of the nation's will, and the savior of the Italian people. His image, meticulously stage-managed and disseminated through every available medium, became ubiquitous, staring down from billboards, gracing postage stamps, and looming large in newsreels and documentaries. Mussolini, a master of spectacle and propaganda, understood the power of imagery and symbolism. He cultivated an aura of strength, virility, and unwavering determination, posing for photographs in a variety of heroic and masculine poses, bare-chested while harvesting wheat, riding horseback through the Roman countryside, or delivering fiery speeches to adoring crowds. His booming voice, amplified by loudspeakers, filled public squares as he delivered his carefully scripted speeches, his words a blend of nationalist rhetoric, promises of greatness, and veiled threats against his enemies. He presented himself as a man of action, a decisive leader unafraid to make tough choices and crush any opposition that stood in his way. This carefully constructed image resonated with many Italians, particularly those yearning for a return to order and stability after years of turmoil and uncertainty. They saw in Mussolini a strong leader, a father figure who would restore Italy to its former glory. However, beneath the carefully crafted facade of strength and determination lurked a ruthless dictator, one who would not hesitate to use violence, repression, and terror to maintain his grip on power and silence any opposition to his rule. The fascist grip tightens, repression, and the suppression of dissent. With his grip on power secure, Mussolini unleashed the full force of his repressive apparatus to crush any remnants of opposition and create a climate of fear and obedience. The black shirts, once instruments of street violence, were integrated into the state apparatus, their brutality now sanctioned by law. They became the OVRA, the secret police, their reach extending into every corner of Italian society. The OVRA, operating with impunity, terrorized suspected opponents of the regime. They spied on citizens, intercepted mail, tapped telephones, and conducted midnight raids, hauling away anyone suspected of harboring anti-fascist sentiments. Torture, imprisonment without trial, and exile became commonplace, tools of a regime determined to silence any whisper of dissent. The fascist courts, devoid of any pretense of independence, served as rubber stamps for the regime, handing down harsh sentences to anyone deemed an enemy of the state. Freedom of speech, assembly, and the press, once enshrined in the Italian constitution, became distant memories, replaced by a suffocating blanket of censorship and fear. Mussolini's repression extended beyond the political realm, seeping into every facet of Italian life. Universities, once bastions of intellectual freedom, were purged of professors deemed insufficiently loyal to the regime. Books, films, and works of art deemed subversive or degenerate were banned, replaced by a steady diet of fascist propaganda designed to glorify Mussolini and his vision for Italy. The fascist grip on Italian society had become total, leaving its citizens with a stark choice: conform or face the consequences. A culture subverted, propaganda, censorship, and the arts under fascism. Mussolini, a shrewd manipulator of public opinion, understood the power of culture to shape minds. He subordinated art, literature, music, and cinema to the regime, transforming them into tools of propaganda. Censorship was meticulous, scrutinizing all forms of cultural expression. Books, films, and plays critical of the regime were banned, creators silenced or exiled. Newspapers and radio broadcasts churned out pro-fascist propaganda, glorifying Mussolini. Mussolini's vision for art celebrated strength, vitality, and martial spirit. Art depicted muscular workers, valiant soldiers, and idealized peasant families. Avant-garde movements were condemned as decadent, their works removed. The cultural landscape became sterile and conformist under fascist rule. The battle for births, social engineering, and the fascist family. Mussolini's vision was a new citizen strong, disciplined, and devoted to the state. Italy's future depended on a population increase for imperial ambitions. Social engineering programs aimed to mold the Italian family. Marriage and procreation were patriotic duties. Financial incentives encouraged large families. Single men and childless couples faced stigma and penalties. Children were seen as blank slates for fascist values. Youth organizations instilled discipline and obedience. Girls were steered towards domesticity and motherhood. Mussolini's programs boosted birth rates but confined women. Emphasis on conformity stifled individuality and critical thinking. Mussolini's economic policies, often touted as a success story by his admirers, were a complex mix of state intervention, corporatist arrangements, and grandiose projects designed to project an image of dynamism and progress. Upon assuming power, he inherited an economy grappling with inflation, unemployment, and the lingering effects of World War I. His initial efforts focused on stabilizing the currency, reducing government spending, and promoting private investment. Central to his economic vision was the concept of corporatism, a system in which the state, rather than the free market, would direct and control economic activity. He established 22 corporations, representing different sectors of the economy, each composed of representatives from labor, management, and the fascist party. These corporations, in theory, were to negotiate and collaborate to achieve national economic goals, eliminating class conflict and promoting harmony between capital and labor. In practice, however, the corporatist system served primarily to strengthen the state's control over the economy, suppressing independent labor unions and empowering a new class of fascist bureaucrats. While Mussolini's economic policies did achieve some successes, such as reducing unemployment and improving infrastructure, these gains were often achieved at the expense of workers' rights, consumer choice, and economic freedom. Moreover, the regime's focus on autarky, or economic self-sufficiency, led to protectionist policies that hampered international trade and made Italy increasingly dependent on expensive domestic production. By the late 1930s, Italy's economy, despite the facade of progress, remained plagued by inefficiency, corruption, and a growing reliance on military spending, setting the stage for the economic hardships that would accompany Italy's disastrous involvement in World War II. Mussolini's reconciliation with the Catholic Church distinguished Italian fascism from its anti-clerical counterparts. Since Italy's unification, the Church resented its loss of power. Mussolini saw an opportunity to secure the Church's support. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty recognized the Vatican City as an independent state. The treaty ended decades of conflict and provided Mussolini's regime with moral legitimacy. However, the Church agreed to refrain from criticizing the regime. This uneasy alliance endured throughout Mussolini's rule. As Mussolini's grip on Italy tightened, his ambitions expanded beyond domestic reform. He dreamt of restoring the Roman Empire, casting himself as a modern-day Caesar. He saw the Mediterranean as an arena ripe for Italian expansion. Mussolini's imperial ambitions were driven by a complex web of motivations. He sought to secure raw materials, expand markets, and establish military bases. His ambitions ran deeper than economic or strategic calculations. He believed conquest was essential for national rejuvenation. Mussolini's rhetoric raised alarm bells across Europe. His calls for a new Roman Empire reflected a deeply held belief. The world was watching, and his pronouncements would soon reverberate across Europe. The allure of conquest drove Italian foreign policy towards reckless adventures. This dangerous obsession led Italy into a disastrous war, shattering Mussolini's dreams of empire. As Mussolini's grip on Italy tightened, his ambitions expanded beyond domestic reform. He dreamt of restoring the Roman Empire, casting himself as a modern-day Caesar. He saw the Mediterranean as an arena ripe for Italian expansion. Mussolini's imperial ambitions were driven by a complex web of motivations. He sought to secure raw materials and expand Italian markets, establishing military bases to project Italian power. Conquest was essential for national rejuvenation, a crucible to forge a new generation of Italians. His rhetoric raised alarm bells across Europe. His calls for a new Roman Empire were deeply held beliefs. Italy was destined to reclaim its place as a dominant power. The world was watching, and his pronouncements reverberated across Europe. The allure of conquest drove Italian foreign policy towards reckless adventures, leading to a disastrous war that shattered Mussolini's dreams and left Italy in ruins. The Corfu incident of 1923 provided an early glimpse of Mussolini's willingness to use military force to achieve his foreign policy goals, however insignificant they might seem. When an Italian general, Enrico Tellini, and his staff were assassinated on Greek territory while overseeing a border demarcation mission, Mussolini seized upon the incident as a pretext for aggression. Despite Greece's denials of involvement and offers to submit the matter to international arbitration, Mussolini demanded an immediate apology, reparations, and the occupation of the Greek island of Corfu as a guarantee of compliance. When Greece hesitated, Mussolini ordered the Italian Navy to bombard and occupy the island, a clear violation of international law. The League of Nations, still in its infancy and eager to avoid a wider conflict, condemned Italy's actions but proved powerless to enforce its resolutions. Mussolini, emboldened by his success, withdrew Italian forces from Corfu only after extracting a humiliating apology and financial compensation from Greece. The Corfu incident, though a relatively minor affair, set a dangerous precedent. It demonstrated Mussolini's willingness to resort to military force to achieve his objectives, even in the face of international condemnation. It also revealed the impotence of the League of Nations in the face of determined aggression, emboldening other dictators who would soon follow Mussolini's lead. This early act of aggression cast a long shadow, foreshadowing the conflicts that would soon engulf Europe and plunge the world into war. The Spanish Civil War, which erupted in 1936, provided Mussolini with an opportunity to test his military might. He refined his fascist ideology and forged closer ties with Germany. Mussolini supported Franco's coup against the Republican government. He dispatched thousands of Italian troops and provided crucial military support. The war became a proving ground for Italian weaponry and tactics. It also served as a training ground for Italian pilots and soldiers. The Spanish Civil War was a dress rehearsal for World War II, cementing the alliance between Mussolini and Hitler. The Spanish Civil War forged a bond between Mussolini and Hitler, drawing their regimes closer. This laid the groundwork for the Axis alliance that would plunge the world into war. Mussolini admired and feared Hitler, seeing him as both a kindred spirit and a rival. Despite reservations, Mussolini saw benefits in an alliance with Germany. Hitler courted Mussolini, withdrawing support for Austrian independence. The Pact of Steel in 1939 formalized their alliance, binding Italy and Germany. This alliance, however, was fraught with tensions and miscalculations. It led to a conflict that claimed millions of lives and shattered the European order. While Mussolini projected an image of strength and unity, a current of dissent simmered beneath the surface of Italian society. Anti-fascists, disillusioned former supporters, and those targeted by the regime's repressive policies whispered their discontent in hushed tones, their words a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of tyranny. Opposition to Mussolini's rule took many forms, from clandestine meetings and underground newspapers to acts of sabotage and armed resistance. Students, intellectuals, workers, and even some disillusioned members of the fascist party itself risked their lives to challenge the regime's grip on power. They distributed anti-fascist leaflets, scrawled subversive graffiti on city walls, and organized secret meetings to discuss strategies for undermining Mussolini's authority. The regime, however, was swift and ruthless in crushing any sign of dissent. The OVRA, Mussolini's secret police, infiltrated opposition groups, arrested suspected dissidents, and subjected them to torture, imprisonment, and exile. Thousands of Italians, deemed enemies of the state, were sent to remote prison islands, their lives shattered for daring to challenge Mussolini's rule. Exile became a refuge for many Italian intellectuals, artists, and political activists who refused to be silenced. From Paris to London, from New York to Buenos Aires, they continued to write, speak out, and organize against Mussolini's regime, their voices a beacon of hope for those trapped within the confines of fascist Italy. Their stories, often overlooked in the grand narratives of history, stand as a testament to the courage and resilience of those who dared to resist tyranny even in the face of overwhelming odds. Mussolini's embrace of Hitler's ideology extended beyond mere geopolitical calculations. It seeped into the very fabric of Italian society, poisoning it with the venom of racism and anti-Semitism. Initially, Italian fascism had not exhibited the same level of obsession with racial purity as its Nazi counterpart. Mussolini, while harboring his own prejudices, had pragmatically downplayed the significance of race, focusing instead on Italian nationalism and imperial ambitions. However, as the Axis alliance deepened and Mussolini sought to emulate Hitler's successes, he adopted increasingly racist policies, targeting Jews and other minorities in an effort to appease his German ally and solidify his own grip on power. In 1938, the Italian government enacted a series of racial laws, stripping Jews of their citizenship, barring them from public office and certain professions, and restricting their property rights. These laws, justified by a toxic blend of pseudo-scientific theories and centuries-old prejudices, marked a dark turning point in Italian history. They shattered the illusion of tolerance and inclusivity that Mussolini had carefully cultivated and exposed the ugliness lurking beneath the surface of Italian society. Jewish communities, once integrated into the fabric of Italian life, found themselves ostracized, their businesses boycotted, their children expelled from schools, their lives upended by this state-sanctioned hatred. While the Italian racial laws were less draconian than their Nazi counterparts, they nevertheless had a devastating impact on Italian Jews, creating a climate of fear, uncertainty, and despair. They paved the way for the deportation and murder of thousands of Italian Jews during the Holocaust, a dark chapter in Italian history that would forever stain Mussolini's legacy. The genocide in the colonies, the atrocities in Libya and Ethiopia. Mussolini's imperial ambitions, driven by a toxic mix of nationalist fervor, racial superiority, and a thirst for conquest, had devastating consequences for the people of Italy's African colonies. In Libya, acquired by Italy in 1912 after a brutal war with the Ottoman Empire, Mussolini unleashed a campaign of repression and violence aimed at crushing Libyan resistance and securing Italian control over the colony's oil-rich territories. And under the governorship of Rodolfo Graziani, a ruthless military commander known for his brutality, Italian forces engaged in a systematic campaign of terror, using concentration camps, mass executions, and chemical weapons to subdue the Libyan population. Hundreds of thousands of Libyans were forcibly relocated from their ancestral lands, their homes and farms confiscated to make way for Italian settlers. In Ethiopia, which Mussolini invaded in 1935 in a bid to avenge Italy's humiliating defeat at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, Italian forces engaged in similar atrocities. They used mustard gas, a banned chemical weapon, against Ethiopian troops and civilians, indiscriminately bombing villages and towns and massacring thousands of unarmed civilians. Mussolini's colonial wars, often overlooked in the annals of 20th century genocide, stand as a testament to the brutality and racism that fueled his imperial ambitions. They left an enduring legacy of trauma and resentment in Libya and Ethiopia, poisoning relations between Italy and its former colonies for generations to come. These atrocities, long shrouded in silence and denial, serve as a stark reminder of the dark underbelly of Italian fascism and the human cost of Mussolini's quest for empire. The gathering storm, Italy on the brink of war. By the late 1930s, Europe stood on the brink of war, the drums of conflict growing louder with each passing day. Mussolini, Emboldened by his successes in Ethiopia and Spain, and increasingly convinced of his own invincibility, drew closer to Hitler, their shared ambitions and ideological kinship, transforming the Axis alliance into a pact of aggression that would have devastating consequences for the world. The annexation of Austria by Germany in 1938, carried out with Mussolini's tacit approval, marked a turning point. It shattered the fragile peace that had prevailed in Europe since the end of World War I and emboldened Hitler to pursue his expansionist ambitions with even greater audacity. The following year, Hitler set his sights on Czechoslovakia, demanding the cession of the Sudetenland, a region inhabited by a sizable German minority. Despite the efforts of British and French leaders to appease Hitler and avert another catastrophic war, the Munich Agreement, signed in September 1938, ceded the Sudetenland to Germany, a betrayal that only emboldened Hitler's appetite for conquest. Mussolini, though playing a less prominent role in the Czechoslovakian crisis, nevertheless supported Hitler's actions, believing that Germany's territorial gains would weaken France and Britain and pave the way for Italian expansion in the Mediterranean. As the storm clouds gathered over Europe, Mussolini found himself increasingly bound to Hitler's chariot, his destiny intertwined with that of the Nazi dictator. The world watched with bated breath, bracing for the inevitable conflagration that would soon engulf the continent and beyond. A fateful miscalculation, Italy enters the abyss. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler unleashed his war machine upon Poland. Britain and France declared war on Germany, plunging the continent into conflict. Mussolini hesitated. Italy was ill-prepared for a major war. Its economy was strained and its people weary, yet the allure of glory proved too strong. On June 10, 1940, Mussolini announced Italy's entry into the war. Italy, he proclaimed, has chosen its side of destiny, confident that our intervention will tip the scales of history. His words masked a deep-seated anxiety. Italy was ill-prepared for the horrors that awaited. Mussolini's decision would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Illusions of grandeur, from early victories to crushing defeats. Italy's early months in World War II were marked by humiliating setbacks, shattering Mussolini's illusions of grandeur. His dream of a swift campaign, mirroring Hitler's blitzkrieg, quickly evaporated. In North Africa, Italian forces were routed by British and Commonwealth troops. In East Africa, Italian colonial troops were outmaneuvered and defeated. Even in Greece, Italian forces met fierce resistance. Their invasion quickly bogged down against determined Greek defenders. These defeats exposed the hollowness of Mussolini's boasts about Italian military might. The Mediterranean cauldron, a theater of defeat and humiliation. As the war dragged on, the Mediterranean Sea, once envisioned by Mussolini as an Italian lake, transformed into a cauldron of defeat and humiliation. The Italian Navy, despite boasting some impressive warships, was hampered by a lack of fuel, outdated equipment, and a cautious strategy that prioritized avoiding decisive engagements with the British Royal Navy. The British, despite being outnumbered, controlled the strategically vital choke points of Gibraltar and the Suez Canal, effectively cutting off Italian supply lines to North Africa and isolating their forces in the eastern Mediterranean. British submarines and aircraft wreaked havoc on Italian shipping, sinking thousands of tons of vital supplies and further weakening the Italian war effort. The Battle of Taranto, fought in November 1940, exemplified Italy's naval woes. In a daring nighttime raid, British aircraft launched from the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious crippled 3 Italian battleships, a devastating blow that exposed the vulnerability of the Italian fleet and shifted the balance of power in the Mediterranean decisively in favor of the British. Italy's naval defeats had far-reaching consequences. They deprived the Axis forces in North Africa of vital reinforcements and supplies, contributing to their eventual defeat. They also exposed the Italian mainland to Allied bombardment and paved the way for the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, an event that would mark the beginning of the end for Mussolini's regime. cracks in the facade, the erosion of Mussolini's authority. The string of military defeats, the mounting economic hardships, and the relentless Allied bombing raids gradually eroded Mussolini's grip on power, exposing the cracks in the seemingly monolithic facade of fascist rule. The Italian people, bombarded with years of propaganda extolling the virtues of war and the invincibility of their duce, grew increasingly disillusioned as the true cost of Mussolini's reckless gamble became apparent. The shortages of food and other essential goods, the constant fear of air raids, and the mounting casualties among Italian soldiers fighting on distant fronts all contributed to a growing sense of discontent. Anti-fascist sentiments, long suppressed by the regime's repressive apparatus, began to resurface. Whispered in hushed tones in cafes and marketplaces, scribbled on bathroom walls, and expressed in acts of defiance, both large and small. Within the fascist party itself, once a bastion of unwavering support for Mussolini, doubts and dissent began to fester. Party officials, sensing the shifting tides of war and the growing unpopularity of the regime, began to distance themselves from Il Duce, their loyalty wavering as they contemplated a future without Mussolini at the helm. Even Mussolini's closest advisors, once sycophantic in their praise of his leadership, began to voice their concerns, their words a mixture of caution and thinly veiled criticism. The aura of invincibility that had once surrounded Mussolini, carefully cultivated through years of propaganda and intimidation, was fading, replaced by an air of weariness, uncertainty, and a growing sense of dread as the walls of his regime began to crumble around him. The invasion and its aftermath, a nation divided. The Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, codenamed Operation Husky, marked a turning point in the war and the beginning of the end for Mussolini's regime. The invasion, met with relatively light resistance from demoralized Italian troops, exposed the fragility of the Axis hold on southern Europe and shattered any remaining illusions about Italy's ability to wage war effectively. As Allied forces swept across Sicily, capturing town after town, Mussolini's grip on power began to slip away. The fascist Grand Council, once a rubber stamp for his dictates, convened in an atmosphere of crisis and recrimination. In a dramatic session fueled by fear and a desperate desire to salvage something from the wreckage of Mussolini's regime, the council voted to strip him of his powers and restore authority to King Victor Emmanuel III. The king, sensing an opportunity to distance himself from the impending disaster and preserve the monarchy, acted swiftly. He ordered Mussolini's arrest, replacing him with Marshal Pietro Badoglio, a career soldier who had grown increasingly disillusioned with the war and Mussolini's leadership. The news of Mussolini's downfall, greeted with jubilation by many Italians, triggered a wave of unrest and violence across the country. Italy was now a nation divided. In the south, Allied forces were welcomed as liberators, while in the north, German troops, fearing an Italian collapse, disarmed their former allies and occupied key cities, effectively dividing the country in two. Mussolini, imprisoned in a remote mountain resort, seemed destined to fade into obscurity, his dreams of empire and glory lying in ruins alongside the shattered remnants of his regime. The fall of Il Duce, the end of an era. Mussolini's imprisonment, however, proved to be short-lived. In a daring raid, orchestrated by Hitler and carried out by German special forces, he was rescued from his mountaintop prison and whisked away to northern Italy, where he was installed as the figurehead of a puppet state, the Italian Social Republic, under the watchful eye of his German patrons. This so-called Republic of Salo, named after the town on Lake Garda that served as its capital, was a pale imitation of Mussolini's former regime. Its authority extended only to the German-occupied zones of northern and central Italy, and its actions were tightly controlled by its Nazi overlords. Mussolini, once the all-powerful Duce, was now a shadow of his former self, his spirit broken, his movements restricted, his decisions subject to the approval of his German handlers. Despite his diminished status, Mussolini continued to cling to power, issuing decrees, delivering speeches, and attempting to rally the Italian people to his cause. His words, however, lacked their former fire. his pronouncements ringing hollow in a nation weary of war, divided by occupation, and increasingly disillusioned with the fascist experiment. As the Allied advance continued and the German grip on Italy tightened, Mussolini's fate was sealed. In April 1945, as the war in Europe entered its final days, he attempted to flee to Switzerland, hoping to escape the advancing Allied armies and the vengeance of his own people. His escape, however, was thwarted by Italian partisans who captured him and his mistress, Clara Petacci, near the village of Dongo on the shores of Lake Como. A legacy of ruin, the price of dictatorship. On April 28, 1945, Mussolini and Petacci were executed by a partisan firing squad, their bodies transported to Milan, where they were hung upside down in a public square, a grisly spectacle that marked the end of an era and served as a visceral reminder of the brutality and futility of Mussolini's regime. Mussolini's legacy is a complex and contested one. He left Italy in ruins, its economy shattered, its social fabric torn apart, its international reputation tarnished by its association with Nazi Germany. His dreams of empire and glory lay in tatters, buried beneath the rubble of bombed-out cities and the weight of countless lives lost in a senseless war. Mussolini's legacy continues to cast a long shadow over Italian politics and society. His regime, with its emphasis on nationalism, authoritarianism, and the cult of the leader, serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, the seductive allure of populism, and the fragility of democratic institutions. The echoes of Mussolini's dictatorship can be felt in the rise of far-right movements across Europe and beyond, movements that exploit economic anxieties, stoke fears of immigration and cultural change, and peddle simplistic solutions to complex problems. Their rhetoric, often laced with nostalgia for a mythical past and fueled by resentment against the present, bears an unsettling resemblance to the language of fascism, a reminder that the ghosts of history have a way of resurfacing when we least expect them. Echoes of the past, the enduring influence of fascism. The spectre of fascism, once thought vanquished, continues to haunt the 21st century. Its echoes are heard in the rise of authoritarian leaders and nationalist ideologies, from Charlottesville's white supremacist march to Hungary, Poland, and Turkey's power consolidation. The warning signs are undeniable. The lessons of history are easily forgotten, and authoritarianism's allure remains potent. The enduring influence of fascism reminds us of democracy's fragility, the importance of safeguarding human rights, and the need for vigilance against intolerance and abuse of power. Judging Mussolini's legacy. The dust has long settled on the battlefields of World War II, the echoes of marching boots and roaring engines replaced by the quiet murmur of history. Yet the spectre of Benito Mussolini continues to loom large over the 20th century and beyond. His legacy, a tangled web of ambition, brutality, and catastrophic failure, remains a subject of intense debate. Was he a visionary leader who modernized Italy, or a ruthless tyrant who trampled on human rights? The answer lies somewhere between these extremes, a nuanced truth that defies simplistic categorization. Mussolini's regime left an indelible mark on Italy, transforming its landscape and instilling order. However, these achievements pale in comparison to the human cost of his dictatorship. The suppression of civil liberties, persecution of opponents, and racial laws stand as a damning indictment of his rule. The legacy of violence and repression continues to haunt Italy, a stark reminder of fascism's destructive nature. The importance of remembering fascism. Italy has grappled with the legacy of fascism, confronting its dark past with honesty and determination. Monuments to Mussolini have been toppled, his name erased from public buildings. Yet, the ghosts of fascism linger in the resurgence of far-right movements across Europe. Remembering fascism is more important than ever. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And the power of storytelling, unveiling the truth through film. History, as the adage goes, is written by the victors. Yet the stories of the vanquished, the silenced, and the forgotten hold a power of their own, offering invaluable insights into the human condition and the complexities of the past. Film, with its unique ability to transport us to different times and places, to immerse us in the lives of others, and to evoke a kaleidoscope of emotions, provides a powerful medium for exploring the dark chapters of history, including the rise and fall of fascism. Through the lens of cinema, we can witness the seductive allure of Mussolini's charisma, the chilling efficiency of his propaganda machine, and the devastating consequences of his totalitarian ambitions. We can see the world through the eyes of those who lived under his rule, experiencing their hopes, their fears, their acts of courage, and their moments of despair. Film allows us to confront the uncomfortable truths of the past, to grapple with the complexities of human nature, and to understand how seemingly ordinary people can be seduced by ideologies that promise order, security, and national greatness, even at the expense of their freedom and humanity. The stories told on screen, whether fictionalized accounts or meticulously researched documentaries, have the power to educate, to challenge our perspectives, and to spark conversations about the enduring legacy of fascism and its relevance to our own time. Celluloid Reflections recommended films about Mussolini. For those seeking a deeper understanding of Mussolini and the impact of his regime, the world of cinema offers a rich tapestry of stories, perspectives, and artistic interpretations. Here are a few recommended films that shed light on this tumultuous period in Italian history. The Conformist, 1970. Directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, this visually stunning film explores the psychological complexities of fascism through the story of a man who becomes an informant for Mussolini's secret police. Seven Beauties, 1975. Lina Wertmüller's darkly comic masterpiece follows the journey of a Neapolitan man who joins the Italian army during World War II and resorts to desperate measures to survive the horrors of war and captivity. Life is Beautiful, 1997. Roberto Benigni's Oscar-winning film offers a poignant and bittersweet look at the Holocaust through the eyes of a Jewish man who uses humor and imagination to shield his son from the horrors of a concentration camp. Mussolini: The Untold Story, 1985. This mini-series, starring George C. Scott as Mussolini, offers a comprehensive, albeit somewhat sensationalized, account of Mussolini's life and career, from his rise to power to his downfall and death. Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's controversial and graphically violent film, set in the waning days of Mussolini's regime, uses a fictionalized account of sexual sadism and torture to critique the brutality and hypocrisy of fascism. These films, while varying in style, tone, and historical accuracy, offer valuable insights into the nature of fascism, the experiences of those who lived under its shadow, and the enduring legacy of this dark chapter in human history. Essential reads on Mussolini and fascism. Books offer depth and nuance that complements the cinematic experience. For a comprehensive understanding of Mussolini and fascism, consider these essential reads. The Rise and Fall of Benito Mussolini by Christopher Hibbert. Mussolini, A Study in Power by Yvonne Kirkpatrick. The Italians by Luigi Barzini. The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. The Anatomy of Fascism by Robert O. Paxton. These books provide valuable insights into Mussolini, fascism, and their enduring relevance. A Final Word: Confronting the Shadows of the Past. The story of Benito Mussolini is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the seductive allure of power, the fragility of democracy, and the human capacity for both extraordinary good and unspeakable evil. It is a story that continues to resonate in the 21st century as the world grapples with the resurgence of authoritarianism, nationalism, and intolerance. As we reflect on Mussolini's rise and fall, let us remember the victims of his regime, those whose lives were shattered by his thirst for power and his embrace of a hateful ideology. Let us honor their memory by confronting the shadows of the past, by challenging injustice and oppression wherever they may arise, and by safeguarding the hard-won freedoms that define a just and equitable society. The past, as the saying goes, is never truly dead. It is not even past. The echoes of history reverberate through time, reminding us that the choices we make today will shape the world we leave behind for generations to come. Let us choose wisely. Let us choose compassion over hatred. Let us choose democracy over tyranny, and let us strive to create a world where the horrors of fascism are never repeated. If you enjoyed this documentary about Benito Mussolini, please like and subscribe. It helps our algorithm. This episode, Mussolini, the author of Fascism, is brought to you by Verum magazine and Kayleen Peoples, the editor-in-chief. All images fall under the Fair Use Act of 1971.